The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Top of the day, I'm Joe Doolittle.
And I'm Kate Dudding.
And this is Story by Story.
Celebrating the human spirit.
With an emphasis on celebrating the idea of story in life. Because stories are part of our lives.
Of course.
And they kind of weave meaning and memory and innovation and creation into life, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But then I'm a fan of stories.
And it also joins people together.
That's the best part. Mm-hmm. That's the best part. And we're going to spend some time sharing ideas about stories. We're going to bring in a very renowned regional storyteller. We're going to listen to stories. We're going to tell you what we've got going on in storytelling in the Capital District. And, gee, Kate, is there anything else we're going to try to do?
Not tap dancing.
No, we're not tap dancing.
No tours of bars. No.
I'm working on that, though. Yeah. I'm working on that. We'll come back to that. I'm always curious, Kate. What's the most interesting thing that you've been doing lately when it comes to storytelling?
Well, something I really enjoyed doing was sharing my program on Broadway's Music Men.
Whoa.
And that was at the Bethlehem Public Library for their senior, once a week on Friday afternoons at 1. They have a program for seniors.
Oh.
So I thought my program on Irving Berlin, the Gershwin brothers, Rodgers and Hammerstein, and Cole Porter would
kind of fit.
Would kind of fit in. And I tell a story and we sing a song.
Aha.
And what was funny was a woman came up to me afterwards and she said, "Now, I told my husband, you always sing along, and you're not supposed to sing along. They said you're supposed to listen to the stories and not sing. But then you said, the first thing you said, and please join me in the story." So my husband was very, very happy. And in fact, when we sang, "Shall We Dance?" "Shall we dance?" he went, "Bo-bo-bo-bo," which is, of course, the way I hear it. And it does fill the rest of that measure. So I was very pleased he was in my audience. And you need a couple of good singers to get the crowd rolling.
Well, I understand that completely, because my most interesting thing was just a couple weeks ago, I was back on campus at Colgate for the 200th anniversary of the college. And it was just a great time. And friends in the class of 69 were reuniting for their 50th. Mm-hmm. And in my old a cappella group, the Vintage Colgate 13, we covered the parts for the 69th banquet. And we sang, and we had wonderful time together. And it was just, if reminiscence is the essence of kind of memory, then I was overdosed on that. So that was good weekend. So that's what I've been doing. We have a wonderful person here with us today, Barbara Palumbo, who has been telling stories for as long as I've known her. And
I think 2 centuries.
She's told in both centuries. And we were recently together at our first Tuesday's open mic at Pinhead Susan's, which was kind of a fun time. It's about time we did something in a bar, apropos of your other. Of course, they've lost their liquor license, so that was not quite what I thought it was going to be. The timing was off. But Barbara, welcome.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Kate.
And
happy to be here.
We were talking about how long you've been a storyteller. I didn't mean to kind of try to date you, but what brought you to storytelling?
You cannot date me.
I can't date you. You're married. I'm sorry.
You're married.
I'm married too.
So, what brought me to storytelling was my job at the state education unit for the Division for Youth, as it was called at that time. We had several, meaning like 50 facilities around the state. And I worked in the central office. So one day we were approached, our education unit, to see if anyone was interested in mentoring a junior high student from Livingston Junior High. And these students would be foreign born and or from a poverty or minority group. So a half dozen of us volunteered, and part of that mentoring had to do with a storytelling component, which I didn't know when I started. Didn't even know what storytelling was. I mean, I knew what it was, but it wasn't for me. And however, I found out that it was the children who were supposed to tell the stories from their cultures. So that was okay. And then we would go on the public access TV program, and we would have the children tell the stories. Except my girl from Afghanistan said, no, I'm not doing that. I'll tell you the story, and you can tell the story. And I said, oh no, honey, this is the way it was set up. No, and no. So the whole thing got switched around. So the mentors were then supposed to tell the stories because this girl wouldn't, and so we all had to. Except that we weren't storytellers. So we were offered a 10-week, once a week, hour-long sessions on how to tell stories. And then we would have the show at the end of the semester, and the kids would bring in food from their countries, and we would sample, all the stuff from Vietnam and from Afghanistan and so on. So that was the first, and I thought, only story, first and last, right? Then fast forward a year or so, one of the facilities, a girls' facility.
And
these are court appointed. Well, we have different levels. We had different levels. We had the secure, which were the razor ribbon types.
Yeah.
We had the non-secure, we had the limited secure, we had the group homes, we had the small facilities, and so on. So this was a girls' facility, and it was a some of the girls went out to community schools, very few, and then the others were schooled there. And so I didn't know, I was asked to be the guest speaker. Now the end of the year ceremony is just that. It's not a graduation. They might call it, they might say graduation, but the children are from ages like 12 to 18. So they were anywhere on the academic spectrum. And so the graduation for some would be to move from one grade to another, or maybe to move from that facility to independent living if they were the right age, or it might be to go from one, to leave and go home. So I'm thinking, well, how am I going to relate to this span from like 7th grade to independent living? And then I thought, oh wait, that story seemed to work. that story connects people. So then I thought, okay, a girls' facility. Now remember, I didn't know anything about stories, choosing them or anything. So I went to a story circle, and I heard, I think it was Betty maybe, telling the Loathly Lady. Was that sound like something she
Betty,
would
that was one of her stories.
So then I thought,
Betty McCanty.
yes, right. So I thought, well, I'll learn that and I'll tell that and see how it goes. So when I got there, it was very informal. I didn't expect that. Everyone sat around in a circle, and before they even said anything to me, they were sharing. And one girl, it was very poignant in a way, because the girls were, they come in like lions and go out like lambs. So they come in raging that they were placed there, and I didn't do anything, and now, and then by the end of the year, they were thanking the staff, they were thanking the counselors, they were thanking the teachers. And one young girl said, they were all young, but one girl said she was pregnant, and she said, I didn't know what was happening to me. I didn't understand what was going on in my body, and thank you for all of you for your support and the counseling, and it was just one after another. Thank you, and then it came to me. Oh, and by the way, see, before that, I was like the scary person from central office,
Right.
coming to monitor their program.
The woman.
Yeah, and now all of a sudden, central office is coming. I mean, now all of a sudden, it's Barbara's coming to be our guest speaker today. So I congratulated them for whatever stage they were going through, and then I said that I thought it was appropriate to share this story with them, and I told them the story. And after that, we had lunch and sat in different tables, and I sat at a table with 3 or 4 of the girls, and this one girl said to me, "Thank you so much for that story, because it taught me that it doesn't matter what you look like on the outside, it matters what is inside you, what's within you, and that means a lot to me." And after that luncheon, and when I was leaving for the day, the principal of the school said, "Barbara, I want to tell you something. That girl who spoke to you, she had been bought and sold 3 times at least that I know of, and she was only 15 years old. And he said she'll be leaving to go home soon. You know, we'll see what happens." But I always thought about what she said, and I still remember her name exactly because she wrote it down on a napkin, and we didn't have internet or anything in those days. It was maybe in the 1980s. And so I think about her sometimes. I don't tell that story. I only told it that one time, and I don't hear it often because it went around the circuit a lot. But whenever I do run across it in my file or something, there she is sitting right in front of me. And so after that, word got around in the rest of the facilities, and before you know it, I was asked, "Could you tell Halloween stories? Could you this? Could you that? Could you come, Christmas, whatever?" And and there was one facility, a boys' facility in Rochester with 110 students, all sitting on the gym floor, and I was up there telling stories to them. I mean, it's powerful. How else can you get the attention of 110 delinquent boys?
So somewhere along the way in that spectrum of yours, you became a storyteller.
Well, once I began to be recognized as a storyteller, even though I didn't think I was one, I kept learning different stories for different places and different situations, and yeah, that's what happened. I became the storyteller instead of that scary person in the central office.
Yeah. Well, the scary person from central office, the stranger, if you will, is, there's a whole tradition of kind of the storyteller coming. If you go to the old Irish Shanachie, the walker, who would come around and tell the stories of the culture.
And the troubadour.
Right, the troubadour.
Sure.
And I suppose the court jester is another example. So I kind of identify with
with the red nose.
Yeah, with all of that. The other thing I heard you say is that you kind of sought out stories. So I'd love to hear a story. We'd love to hear a story. But then I'd love to come back and talk a little bit about how you find stories or how stories come to you. But if you've got a story, we'd love to hear it.
Well, you mentioned Irish, the Shanachie, and I do have an Irish tale. It's in Irish lore, the land of Tir na Nog is a mythical island said to be located off the west coast of Ireland. It's a paradise. The climate is perfect. There's no sickness or death, just happiness and beauty. And because time stands still there, people do not grow old. So the only way to get there, though, there's a way, is by magic. Not everyone can go there, even though it's so desirable. And this story is about a warrior named Oisin and what happened when he went to Tir na Nog. Oisin was a great warrior. He was a fine athlete and a gifted poet. He was the son of the great Finn McCool, the leader of the Fianna, which was the group of strong, talented men who guarded the King of Ireland. And every day, Oisin and his fellow Fianna warriors would ride their horses around the green hills of Ireland, hunting and exploring every day. And one sunny morning, it was Oisin who was leading the hunt, and he had his father's dog with him, his father's dog, Bran. And no sooner had they entered the forest when they saw a beautiful stag grazing, and the stag looked up, saw them, and ran, of course, leading them on a chase around Loch Lean and beyond, into the hills beyond the lake. And Oisin was proud of the way that Bran was gaining on the stag until they came to a wide river. And with one mighty leap, the stag cleared that river. And Bran, even though he was a strong dog, could not jump like that. He went in the river and tried to swim, but it was too late. The stag was long gone, so Bran came back, hanging his head, and Oisin just pet him gently and said, "It's all right, Bran, it's all right." And suddenly Bran bristled and stiffened and began to bark wildly. And Oisin turned to see what was happening, and behind him, there in the distance, he saw a white steed, its mane flowing, approaching them from the top of a hill. And he couldn't make out who the rider was, but he was fascinated by the way that steed just seemed to float over that rough terrain. And in the next instant, Oisin was looking at a vision that took his breath away. There, astride that magnificent steed, was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She had long golden hair that flowed around her face, and she wore a pale blue dress covered with stars. And on her head was a delicate crown studded with jewels and diamonds, and that just sparkled in the morning sun. And he looked at her, and when he got his voice, he said, Who are you? Where did you come from? And how can I be of assistance? I am Niamh from the land of Tir na Nog, where my father is king. She spoke in the sweetest of tones. And Oisin, I have searched for you for a long time, for your fame as a great warrior and poet has spread to faraway places. And then she told him of Tir na Nog, where people never grow old, where there's no sickness or death, no strife or discontent. People live in peace and harmony. In Tir na Nog, the sun shines every single day. And she continued, I want to take you back to this magical land with me. For you see, my parents have wanted me to marry several times, but I've refused. Oisin, I want to marry only you. And if you come with me to that magical land of Tir na Nog, I promise you, you will have my love forever. Her voice was like music to his ears, and Oisin had never thought he would ever leave Ireland. He loved Ireland. He loved his father and his brother warriors, but he was so drawn to Tir na Nog and to Niamh, her promise of love and the land of eternal youth, that he bid his father and his friends farewell, and he leapt on that steed behind Niamh, and the horse turned and galloped faster than the wind, faster and faster over vast expanses of ocean as if they were on dry land, over snow-covered islands and fiery mountains. The landscape just flashed before his eyes, faster and faster, until they came to a large forest, and then the horse slowed its pace. And then it stopped in front of a gatehouse. And 2 guards opened the iron gates, and immediately there was a fanfare of trumpets announcing their arrival. And 2 rows of people lining a walkway that led up to the palace where the king and queen stood. And within a few days, wedding preparations were made, and Oisin and Niamh were joined in marriage. Now, Oisin was deeply in love with Niev, and he was happy there. He had everything that he ever needed or wanted. He loved just strolling around on those hills, overlooking the forest that surrounded the palace. And one day, as he sat there on a rock, taking in all the beauty around him, he thought he heard the sound of a bugle from the Fianna, summoning the warriors to hunt. He half expected to see his father's dog Bran appear over the horizon, but that didn't happen. He knew it was just his imagination, but he was suddenly seized with just an overpowering longing to go back to Ireland, to see his father and his friends. And when Niev discovered that that's what was bothering him, she said, Oisin, this is the moment I feared the most since we were married. But I will not stop you from visiting Ireland. I just need you to make a solemn promise that you will not dismount from my steed, which I will give you, take you there. Because if your feet even touch Irish soil, you can never return here to Tir na Nog. We will never see each other again. Well, Oisin knew he couldn't live with that, so of course he promised. And early the next morning, he bid Niev farewell, and he leapt on that steed, and the steed turned and galloped toward Ireland, and they were there faster with the speed of wind, and they arrived there in Ireland, and Oisin went to the lakes of Colonie, where he expected to hear the sound of bugles and the baying of dogs, but all was quiet. And not only that, the whole landscape had changed. The forest where the Fianna used to love to hunt, all those trees were gone, chopped down and turned into pasture. Oisin saw one figure, a fisherman, casting his line off the shore of Lake Leon. And so he asked the fisherman, have you seen Finn McCool and the Fianna? Do you know where I can find them? And the fisherman looked very puzzled. Finn McCool and the Fianna, he repeated. Why, they haven't hunted here since my great-grandfather was a boy. Oisin was puzzled. How could that be? He turned the horse and went to Kildare, which was the winter home of the Fianna. But all he found there were crumbling walls and covered with ivy and thorns and bushes. His eyes welled up with tears. He didn't know what was going on. And then he saw three men in the distance trying to roll a boulder, trying to push a boulder up toward a fence. And they saw him and they motioned for him to come and help. He went there, and with one hand he just reached down and just lifted that boulder and hurled it right to the fence. But the pressure of that move was so great that it broke the strap of his saddle, and he was hurled to the ground. And as soon as he touched Irish soil, he could feel the life being just draining out of him. And to the amazement of those three men, they saw that mighty warrior change to a withering old man right before their eyes. For you see, because time did not exist in Tir na Nog, Oisin thought it may have been about 3 years that had passed, when in fact it had been 300 years. And he lay on the ground, he turned his head, he saw the steed come, and the steed nudged his face gently, and then he turned and galloped toward Tir na Nog. But just before Oisin died that day, he was able to tell those three men the stories of Finn McCool and of the Fianna and of Tir na Nog. And those stories remain with us to this very day.
Oh, great.
So that's the story of Tir na Nog and Oisin.
Oisin. And they are told
They are told.
The little stories are told.
Yes, they are, absolutely.
Yep.
Even though he didn't live happily ever after.
Now, I was thinking that too. This is not a story that lives happily ever after.
The loathsome lady has a nice, satisfying, positive ending.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. That's English. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Well, it does make the Thomas Hardy line, you can never go home again. But still, great story. Oh, maybe think a lot about all the Irish traditions, which are wonderful too. So, well, Kate, what have we got coming on in storytelling over the summer?
Okay. Well, first of all, we have 3 series that are on vacation. The first Monday, Tales and Stuff, Interfaith Story Circle, and Storytelling Open Mic at Cafe Lena all take July and August off.
And a deep breath is a reason to regather energy for another season. Just so you know.
Right. But there are 2 story series that are only in the summer. Or the first one is Wiawaka Center for Women. So that's a retreat place for women to go. And that's only open between Memorial Day and Labor Day.
Right.
And as it happens, 4 of our members of Story Circle independently contacted Wiawaka and arranged to do programs there. And 4 during July and 2 during August. So it starts with July 9th. You can have 2 of us. Marnie Gillard in the morning will be teaching Storying Our Way to be Channels of Peace. And it's a story sharing class to help us understand what it means to know peace and live in it in today's world. We'll share memories one-on-one, listening deeply and appreciating what we hear, and then group discuss strategies that come from our stories and name the small yet significant ways we believe add to the peace that the world wants to know. And obviously this will involve class participation. And then that night after dinner, I'll be telling stories of Georgia and Ida O'Keeffe. That Georgia O'Keeffe, when she was an art student in New York City, spent time at Wiawaka one summer. And so this is part of Wiawaka Week. No, Georgia O'Keeffe Week at Wiawaka. I just love the name, Wiawaka.
Wiawaka.
Yes. So my first story that night will be using Georgia O'Keeffe's own words to describe why she painted what she painted. When she was in her 80s, she published a big, like a coffee table book, and there's a nice reproduction of a painting, and then her own words, not the critics, not the art historians, her words.
Nice.
And then I will give a preview of a summer exhibit at the Clark Art Institute in Williamstown, Massachusetts. Ida O'Keeffe, Escaping Georgia's Shadow. Ida was one of Georgia O'Keeffe's 2 younger sisters who were artists. There was a third one also. She came from a large family. And the 2 younger sisters, Ida and the other one, had a public exhibition in New York. And after that, Georgia said, "You shouldn't be exhibiting art. I am the artist." And Ida did not marry someone influential in the art world.
The way Georgia did.
The way Georgia did. And so she had to earn her own living. And she went to nursing school so that she would have, not only could she be an art teacher during the Depression, but she could also
Be a nurse.
So she never had the backing that Georgia did. And her work is, I've got the catalog. This exhibit was first elsewhere and then coming here. So and it's interesting. It's interesting. So, and then the next night, Claire Nolan will be impersonating Georgia O'Keeffe. So as Georgia O'Keeffe, she'll be telling about her life and her work. And then finally, the end of the week on Friday, Eileen Egan Mack will do a performance on Jean Robert Foster, Voice of the Mountains. And she brings this woman who had a remarkable background of both in New York City and in the mountains.
And in Paris.
And in Paris, yes. Bring it to life. Now, does that, I've always wanted to do, but I've never, does that involve Eileen singing?
It does.
Oh, good.
She sings, and she becomes Jean Robert Foster, and it's a fascinating tale. And Jean Robert Foster was born over near Chestertown, did all these things that we described, and then after that artistic flair, was a social worker in Schenectady for the balance of her life. So she's got multiple characters and personalities, and Eileen does them all. It's quite extraordinary.
So if you want to find out more information, each of these programs involve a modest charge. You can go to wiawaka.org/calendar and look it up by the dates.
Now, the other secret about that is that Wiawaka is a program that's really organized for women.
Right.
But these are coeducational audiences for these programs, aren't they?
I'm not sure.
Oh.
I tried to contact them.
Ooh, I was wrong.
And
I was wrong.
there are some months that are and some that aren't.
So check.
So actually, it will show on this slide something that we don't know at the moment.
Right.
But before this show is
But it's
published, now you know, and we will.
If you're a guy and you can get into one of these things, it's really good because it's a beautiful place, and it's a great story of a very vibrant institution that was launched out of the women's rights movement in the turn of the last century.
Right. That it was designed to give a place for Troy factory workers, the women, a place to have a vacation. And it's within walking distance of the train station. Not that I'm sure the train stops there anymore, but it's only a mile outside of the center of Lake George Village on the east side. So something that does go year-round is our Story Circle meetings. Barbara mentioned going to one to learn about storytelling. The next one is Tuesday, July 16th, right here at the Colonie Town Library, 6 to 8 p.m., to share works in progress or to listen to people sharing works in progress. And the tellers can get as much or as little feedback as they want. Sometimes reviving an old story.
Right.
It's nicer to tell it to human faces than your microwave or your dog. And then others, the story is a little more than an idea that you're trying to wrestle into a story.
And if you're a maybe storyteller and want to find out more, that's a great opportunity. And we welcome newbies to come and try and tell a story and take that first step in storytelling. So,
and the maximum length is about 10 minutes. We're not talking sagas, especially if you're starting out. You want a little thing to learn on. And then the 28th annual, not just for kids storytelling, over at Schoharie Crossing, which is in Fort Hunter, New York, which is just beyond Amsterdam. So from in the Capital District, I live in Clifton Park. It takes me about 45 minutes to drive there. It's shorter from Saratoga Springs because you can go over 67. On the thruway, you zip right along there. So they have some local tellers and some out-of-state tellers. On July 28th is an absolutely fabulous storyteller from North Carolina, Connie Reagan Blake. She was involved with the storytelling renaissance in this country starting in the 1970s. And she's a wonderful teller. She's a really lovely woman. So I strongly urge you to go to that. Unfortunately, I'm going to be in California at the National Storytelling Conference. Oh well. And then there are, every Sunday in August, there are tellers, and then we end the Sunday after Labor Day with our very own Sandy Schumann. So it's
And-
free. Donations, they ask for donations. They have modest refreshments afterwards. All of us have told there.
Actually, Schoharie Crossing's story program is one of the best kept secrets in the Capital District. It's a great place to tell and listen. We're right along the Schoharie Creek. They start at 6 o'clock, so the sun is long and the shadows are beautiful, and it is just pretty and wonderful. So be encouraged to show up.
Yes. And then Story Circle at Proctor's will be back in September and announcing our upcoming 13th season there. There will be 5 word plays and celebration in November. Our topics are hope, turning points, kindness, sticky situations, and lemons to lemonade, which also involves stickiness.
Yes.
And then our big extravaganza production with about 8 different tellers to be determined. The topic is mountains, which could be actual or
Literal.
literal
Or figurative.
Yes.
Sorry, I can get
Yes.
those two things wrong.
Yes. And you can go to our website and get over 200 stories on demand. Go to storycircleatproctors.org and click on YouTube. And you can also get TV shows on demand, shows made right here in this studio. Storycircleatproctors.org, click on Story by Story. And tell all your friends about this, too, please.
Wow, that's a lot for taking a vacation. You know what I'm saying? Wow.
So we have oodles of time left.
Well, good. 'Cause-
That oodles, 23 minutes.
Well, let's talk a little bit about kind of finding stories or having stories find you, because when you get a request to tell stories at graduation or whatever, on one hand you may have some in the file, on another hand they might not fit that topic. So how do you go about finding a tale or discerning what the right story is?
Well, I grew up with comic books. I loved comic books, and I grew up with, in the 70s, I think there was like Alfred Hitchcock and Twilight Zone, those kinds of things. So except for these graduation or ceremonies, when I thought about stories, I tended to go on the dark side. I love detective stories, and once I was asked to. A friend of mine who left DFY and went to Vanderheiden said to me, he called me up and said, "Barbara, these kids think that they are so above everything. They're not, nothing scares them. I want you to come and tell them Halloween stories and scare the bejesus out of them." Something like that. "That's your assignment," he said, "and do it." So I found some stories that were really scary. I did. I once cleared a room with how scary the stories were at Guilderland Library because they told me it was for adults, and all of a sudden these little children showed up, and I said, "No, I didn't."
No.
But anyway, so some of the story, obviously those aren't for everybody. Those are only for certain occasions. And so how I find stories, I remember Tom Weekly once said that someone asked him how he found stories. I remember this is from 30 years ago. He said, "On my knees." And they said, "Oh, you pray?" And he said, "No. I crawled around in the library in the children's section on my knees looking for stories."
Oh,
That's
Christ.
And I always remember that. But what I do, of course, is try to match my stories to the audience. Mm-hmm. So if I'm telling, and I've done 2 retreats, religious retreats, for volunteers at St. Mary's Hospital in Amsterdam. The sister, Joan Mary Hartigan, is a young sister in charge of I don't know, animation or whatever. Well, she wouldn't like it if I didn't come up with her title. She's a vice president of something that is spiritual, and she was doing two retreats. So we got together. She asked me, and we decided to do the spiritual and corporal works of mercy, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and that was one. And so she would give some spiritual direction in that, along that line, and I would find stories, and these were just regular stories but they were something that fit that, and I love to use Elijah stories. I have a load of books at home from the Jewish tradition, and Elijah, of course, is in Christian, Jewish, and Muslim. Right. He's a prophet, and he's in all his stories are wonderful. He appears disguised as a beggar or something like that, and then you pass him by and then find out you missed the chance to see the great prophet. Those are kinds of stories I like, and I tried to get away from some of those. I'm trying to get into a little more humorous, but folk tales I like, except folk tales are folk tales, and a lot of people tell folk tales, so I tried to not to tell the same ones that other people tell, and I'm not I don't write personal stories, but how do I find them? I go back in my childhood, all the stories that I loved. My first story that I remember hearing, and I was only just before kindergarten, was The Fisherman and His Wife, and that's kind of a dark story in a sense, but I love that story, and then I told that story, but then even my own daughter said, "Mom, that story, that's not for everybody. That's kind of scary."
Well, but it's
right.
Don't push your luck.
I know, but then there's a version of that was written by a woman, a prisoner, inmate. She told it in a different, updated version, but it fit her situation. Her husband was the mayor of a town, and instead of then he wanted to go, or she wanted him to become governor, and and go all the way up to be king or something. Right. And then so I use that version a couple of times, but my stories I sometimes, because I customize them to a particular audience, I don't always use them over and over again, which is hard. I'll be telling stories to the Sisters of Mercy at the Mother House in Albany, which is right across from St. Peter's Hospital, and because I worked at Maria College for a time, and they run that college, and so they knew I was a storyteller, and so I do stories for them. We have in the liturgical calendar, we have the Advent, we have Lent, and we have ordinary time. Right. So I did Advent, I did Lent, and now we're on ordinary time.
So you can tell them the scary stories.
I can tell them anything. I can tell them this one, Tierra Nog. I can tell, but I love spiritual stories, and they don't have to be religious. They're just regular stories. Right. Joe and the Carpenter, for example,
right.
Is one that a lot of people haven't heard that in the convent life. In storytelling circles, everybody knows that story, but not in church audiences necessarily. And so there are times. It takes me a long time to find a story, Joe. It takes me a long time. I search and search and search, and things just don't resonate with me.
Fran Yardley said, finding a story is like making maple syrup. You take 40 gallons to get one.
Oh, it's really, that's probably the most brutal, grueling thing that I do is search and search and search. And sometimes...
Do you have the book by Alyssa Permain, 52 Doorways to the Soul?
I do not have that one. I have others
by her?
No, I have
Oh.
others that are of that same
Right.
ilk.
They're little stories, but in the back there's an index
Yes,
by
right.
topic.
Sure.
And
Right.
so I highly recommend that.
I have soul food
Yeah.
Or-
yeah, some of those
Right.
older ones, and I have some Christian ones, some Catholic
Mm-hmm.
ones, some Jewish ones that all have those little kernels of
Yeah.
story.
Yes.
Like the story from Crete. That was told in about 4 lines. The story from Crete where the man dies and he grabs soil from
Oh,
and
the-
then,
Tom-
then
we
Tom
had a version,
then Tom
right.
turned it
The
into
man who clung to earth.
yeah,
Yes.
that was told, and then in the index it had the story, the actual story. In that, I really liked that story a lot. But now it's and I did tell that at the cathedral one time. I told that to a group. There.
Tom's version with Pinochle?
No, it was,
Pinochle or poker that the guys were playing.
I don't.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't. Yeah, they were
right,
playing
I know.
cards. They were playing something. Yeah.
Yeah.
And no, it wasn't his.
Come in, we need it,
Right. Well, it was the same story. It's the same
Right.
story.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
But I used the one from that book, the Crete, from Crete, and then I've never been to Crete, so I looked up Crete and I did the whole topography and
Yeah.
looked up and saw what shore they were faced this, and so that's kind of fun to do to build on that, but it is difficult for me right now. Again, this is something that I remember not from my youth, but from when I was teaching youth, The Lady or the Tiger.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm thinking about that, and I have about 20 different versions of that at home, and I'm trying to call that into something that's because that's so old-fashioned and so many huge words in there. Nobody could, it's a good reading story, but to tell it, I'm wordsmithing it right now.
Well, we've talked a bit about how you find stories, and I appreciate that because I think it is work. At least it is for me.
And the problem is, I think, which wasn't mentioned explicitly, is I think the first rule in storytelling is only tell stories you love, stories that
That's
resonate.
right. Yeah, right.
And fit your
Oh
audience.
yeah, right.
So it's
It doesn't. People have offered me stories and they just don't.
Don't fit.
Thanks,
Don't fit.
thanks, but no thanks.
yeah, it's like, no, that's really not my color.
Yeah, right,
Thank
right.
you.
Right.
It looks good on you, but maybe not so much.
Don't ever wear purple. That's one of the things that my wife told me. At any rate,
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Sorry.
we'd love another story.
Yes.
Okay,
Please.
good. I just was looking up at the clock. The other story.
We have 12 minutes.
Good.
11 minutes.
Okay, I can fit that in.
Okay.
I love baseball. I love baseball. Love it. And the story I found is about it's a baseball story, and it's about an orphan. And my father was brought up in an orphanage, and he became a huge baseball fan, which he passed along to my brother and to me. Not so much one of my sisters too, but all different teams. But here's the story of an orphan boy and a baseball player by the name of Gus Zernial, long time ago. The year was 1951. It was a beautiful, beautiful spring Saturday in Philadelphia. And the orphan boy was alone, as usual. In his 10 years in the orphanage, he had never had a friend, in quotes. That was the name given to a visitor coming to the orphanage. And that was no surprise, because even among his fellow orphans, he was an outcast. The other boys had reasons for that. For one thing, this boy was a bedwetter, and they made fun of him. They called him the wet the bed boy. And for another thing, he wasn't athletically inclined. And at recess, instead of joining in their games and their sports, he would find a corner in the playground and he would play marbles by himself. And for another thing, in the classroom, he was a pain because he would raise his hand to answer every single question, wave it around to answer every question the teacher asked, and the others didn't like that. But the biggest source of contempt and scorn from the other boys was the very fact that he had never, not even once, had a friend visiting him. So imagine his surprise. One day he's called to the director's office, and he was told that there was a friend waiting for him, and he was astounded. Who could this friend be, and why would anyone, for that matter, want to visit me? But when he met his friend, whose name was Mr. Coleman, he saw a kind face and a warm smile. "How would you like to go to a ball game?" Mr. Coleman asked. "Okay," said the boy. Now, it turned out to be a baseball game, and the boy, of course, heard of baseball, but he never played it, and he didn't know anything about it. The game was played in the city at Shibe Park, and when the boy looked up, he saw a big sign that said, "Home of the Philadelphia A's." Oh, now he thought, that makes sense. They're probably orphans too. This is their home. And they're playing a team from Boston called the Red Sox. Well, Mr. Coleman led this boy up endless iron stairways until they came to the bleachers. And their seats were over there in a place known as left field. And when the boy stood there in front of his seat and looked out at that field, it was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. A vast, fan-shaped emerald green lawn. And from a place that Mr. Coleman told him was called home plate, there were two pure white lines diverging and then coming together again to create a perfectly formed diamond. And the whole field was surrounded by a tall green fence. And then once the field was watered and those pure white bases were set down, it was more beautiful, more perfect than anything he could ever imagine. And when Mr. Coleman saw that look of awe on the boy's face, he smiled. And then he cupped the boy's shoulders and he said, "Here come the players." And men in baggy flannel knickers came springing out onto the field, scattering all over. "Look, see him? See him?" Mr. Coleman was pointing to one of the players who was jogging across the field. And when the player stopped, he was almost right beneath them. And the boy looked down. He couldn't see much except the top of the hat and the shoulders and part of a large number on the player's back. "Who's he?" "He's Gus Zernial. He's the left fielder." But wait till he gets to bat. He can hit the ball a country mile. Why, he may even hit a home run today. A home run? Is that a good thing? Mr. Coleman didn't even answer that. He just closed his eyes and smiled and nodded so profoundly that the boy knew that a home run, whatever it was a very, very good thing. Well, Mr. Coleman explained every play of the game, and when a player slid into home plate, he nudged the boy and said, "Watch the umpire." And in an instant, the umpire would pull a whisk broom out of his hip pocket and squat down in that dust, and whoosh, 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 home plate reappeared as if by magic. And Mr. Coleman predicted everything that the boy would see. The arguing, the booing, the cheering, the spitting, and it was all true. And inning after inning, after the A's turn at bat, Gus Zernial would trot back and take his place at left field. And now it was the bottom of the 8th inning. Gus Zernial was at bat. And the boy was sitting there when suddenly a commotion erupted all around him. It seemed like everyone was cheering in unison, and then they all bolted to their feet, including Mr. Coleman. And the boy looked up and he saw it. A baseball, dove white, soaring through the air and falling at last into a sea of frantically straining arms several aisles away. No one had to tell him that that was a home run. And now he shaded his eyes and he watched as Gus Zernial touched each and every bag. And when he crossed home plate, all the players came out of the dugout to congratulate him. Oh, but he didn't tip his cap. Mr. Coleman told him that Gus Zernial would tip his cap if he made a home run. And he didn't. And Mr. Coleman promised. And all his other predictions came true. Why not this one? Now the boy was upset a little bit, But who was he to quibble over this one little detail? Because he was nothing but a wet-the-bed, wiseacre, orphan boy with no real friends anyway. Why should Gus Zernial tip his cap for him? But he couldn't help longing for that tipped cap, even more so than for the home run itself. And he couldn't help wondering, was it because of me? He blinked back his tears, and now the inning ended, and Gus Zernial was trotting back to take his place in left field. And once again, the commotion started. The people began to shout and whistle and stamp their feet, and now they were chanting, "Gus, Gus, Gus." But he didn't even respond to that. He seemed to not hear them. He came back and he took his place and faced the infield, and behind the boy, the chanting continued, and the boy wanted to chant. He wanted to call Gus, 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 but he was too afraid. What if Gus Zernial should see him? He might not like it. But then the chanting rose to a feverish pitch, and down below, Gus Zernial was turning around, and the boy could see that fancy letter A above the brim of his cap, and now he tilted his head back, and he was looking into the bleachers. He was looking right at me, the boy thought. And then with a delicacy one would never expect, Gus Zernial took the brim of that cap between his thumb and forefinger and briefly and forever tipped his cap.
Oh,
You like?
I loved it.
Oh, I grew up in a one television family in the 1950s and 60s. The New York Yankees was the team. And I've been to Yankee Stadium a number of times. I never appreciated the beauty of the emerald
Right.
field with the white diamond.
Yes.
You brought everything so wonderfully to life.
Yeah.
And the boy, you didn't even give him a name, but he didn't need a name. That's in the folk tales.
Right.
It's
Right.
the king and the queen.
Yep.
You know, the boy. Sometimes Jack had a
Well,
name.
because it pointed to the fact that he was an orphan boy,
Yeah.
and he was the orphan boy, and I thought of my dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I thought of.
And where did you find this story?
That was in a book of 10 baseball stories, and each one took place on each of the home plate, first base, second base, but they were all different authors. In fact, Joe Bruchac is one of the storytellers in that book, and this one was written by Jerry Spinelli.
Oh, wow.
So it's a fictional story. But Gus Zernial was a real
Gus Zernial is real. In fact, I have a picture of him. He was on a baseball card, and he has a baseball bat with all these balls around it, signifying all the home runs. He was a great home run hitter.
Okay. Gus.
Amazing.
Oh, we just have 1 minute to say goodbye. Whoosh.
Time goes by when you're having fun.
Yes.
Barbara, thank you for coming.
you're very
and
welcome.
For sharing your stories and your research. And Kate, thank you for holding everything together.
Yes.
You're kind of like the gluten of this whole effort.
And we're not gluten-free.
And we're not gluten-free. Nope. And I may just be like any other piece of pasta
and we
right
must
here.
thank Greg for being the flower.
Yes. Thank you.
And the Colonie Library for these great facilities.
For hosting us.
Right.
And, we hope to have you come and listen to stories at one of our functions. And it's just great to have you out there listening and watching.
Thank you.
And we hope you come back again.
Right.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning